Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. What's up, Patricia?
Oh, Greg, nothing's going on.
It's been a busy week. This is like the crazy busy.
It is insane.
Pre-primary week with all the big news going out the door with the deadline days, we like to call it, which is the last day in that 40-day window for Governor Kemp to sign or veto legislation. It's weird because it's getting overshadowed by all the political news. But we also spent the first 3 months of the year talking a lot about what was happening under the Gold Dome. And so we don't want to.
Yeah, totally. This is a 3-ring circus, except it's a 3-ring circus. So that means there are at least 9 rings, Greg, that you need to be on top of.
You too. So let's dive into deadline day when the governor put his final stamp on hundreds of bills passed by the legislature, or in the case of about 12 of them, nixed by his red pen. And this year, the choices were especially revealing. Kemp signed a major income tax cut earlier this week that Republicans will campaign on for years to come. But that decision also blew a massive billion-dollar-plus hole in the budget and triggered what lawmakers called a financial massacre, forcing the governor to slash spending and veto projects really across the state, Patricia. At the same time, the governor signed some of the year's most politically explosive measures, including a law reshaping local elections across Metro Atlanta that will spark a constitutional fight with Democratic prosecutors, and another measure forcing disclosure of sexual harassment settlements involving sitting and former state lawmakers. We're going to break down what the governor signed, what he vetoed, and what it tells us about the final stretch of his governorship and the 2026 campaign already unfolding around him. Let's start with that income tax cut, because this was a real debate for the governor. I was never shocked that he signed it, but I know there was some, there was a double-edged sword with this. This is something the governor and his Republican allies have long tried to do, which is continue to shave off the state income tax, shave it down couple tenths of a percentage point every year. We know the Republican campaigns for governor and other statewide races all focus on eliminating the state income tax, but there is a downside to that as well.
The downside is the revenue side. If you are reducing your revenue, you're going to have to reduce your obligations. And so when the governor made his decisions about what to sign or not to sign, he also has the option to go in and do what is essentially a line item veto in the state budget. He can go in and do something called a disregard, which is instructions to the state budget office to disregard the legislative instructions, meaning ignore this piece of funding request from lawmakers, as in do not fund it. And so we heard from the governor yesterday afternoon in his office that he had made a number of disregards. We had heard earlier from some appropriators that they felt like it was going to be, in the words of what somebody said to you, a bloodbath. And you don't quite get an idea of the scope of what that looks like until we started to see the disregards from the governor. And I mean, there are some. It's not cutting existing funds. It is cutting new funding to very specific and in some cases really important programs that lawmakers had wanted to fund. But the governor is saying, listen, if you guys come in and do a huge tax cut, which they have done, and you want to do new spending, one of the two has got to go. He told us in his remarks at the state capitol that lawmakers knew that when they passed the tax cut and passed the spending, he was going to have to veto one or the other. And so he's come in and vetoed a number of these spending programs that lawmakers wanted. They've been working in some cases years to get them funded. Some of them are really, really small. The smaller they are, the more important they are to the people on the other side of it. I have to tell you that, because it's just a small source of funding from the state that either groups, programs, or people were not going to get otherwise, and they're not getting it this year either.
Yeah, and all the governor killed about $300 million in new spending. And we should reemphasize it's new spending. This wasn't cuts to programs that are already existing. That does not include literacy programs and some benefits for state law enforcement officers, but it does include money for homeless veterans, K through 12 student transportation, airport infrastructure, school safety grants, outdoor recreation projects, other legislative priorities. There was a lot of hurt feelings around the Gold Dome, Patricia, this week. Also, he cited the fiscal squeeze in vetoing about a half dozen other pieces of legislation that would have expanded a timber tax credit, extended tax breaks for museums and fine arts performances, boosted incentives for historic properties, and created a Georgia music office. And a big one, another one would have steered money into a state fund that is designed to preserve parks, trails, and wildlife. So there are a lot of upset lawmakers who had fought for those. Many of those were bipartisan priorities. In the veto messages for most of them, the governor said, hey, look, I agree with the idea behind this, but lawmakers failed to account for the funding of that. I mentioned $300 million in new spending, Patricia, but overall it's a $1.3 billion deficit that the governor's expecting. And how they plan to fill the other $1 billion, well, part of it's going to come from the dwindling, still big, but dwindling state surplus. And part of it is just hoping that the economy continues to grow. But we've already seen tax revenues start to slow down.
Yeah, the budget chief said that this budget assumes continued growth. However, the governor said if that growth does not continue, we'll be back here in my office and I will make more cuts. He was very clear about that. Now, also, it's really important to note that the governor could have used the state surplus to cover all of this. He could have dipped in there. He said he didn't want to do that. He felt like Nathan Deal had left him a big surplus to work with. Now, it was much smaller at the time than what the governor's leaving behind. But he said, I want to leave this state in better financial shape than I found it. And I feel like I'm in a position to do that right now. And he didn't want lawmakers to make some of these would have been annual appropriations more than likely. But for a one-time budget, he said that's just a mistake. So budgets are about priorities. A huge priority for the governor is to have lean spending, significant tax cuts, and a budget surplus. But it's just math at the end of the day. So when you get into having an across-the-board income tax reduction, you raise the standard deduction, you reduce taxes on tips and overtime and retirement pay, it just all starts to drain away the flexibility you have in the state budget. Other programs that were cut, $2 million for Sunbucks. That's a summer food stamp program for kids who typically get lunch at school. 2.7 for paid leave for pre-K teachers. That's not going to happen this year. $600,000 for clothes and supplies for foster children. So some of these may be able to pick up funding from nonprofits, but it's a line item that they had thought they had wrapped up because they had done the lobbying, they had gotten in front of lawmakers, there was bipartisan support. But then, you get to the end of the year and if the math is not matching, the governor's not going to sign it.
If the math isn't mathing, yeah. There's a couple of ways to look at it, Patricia, because, there are some Kemp allies who said he was the grown up in the room and, he didn't want to just, paper this over with sunshine and rainbows, that he didn't want to just dip into the surplus and pay for it all, which he could have, as you mentioned, because he had to be that sort of dose of reality for his party, for the leaders in his party who were all promising on some level, slashing the income taxes and cutting taxes even more and reducing state revenues, saying, hey, there has to be, some give and take. He could have, the view from some Republican lawmakers is he could have done just that, left it kick the can down the road. And why didn't he do that? And then the view from a lot of Democrats is he should not have signed that income tax bill in the first place, because that is what's prompted a lot of these hard decisions. And it will blow a hole, or at least reduce the state's income, the state's revenue from years on out.
Yeah, and you and I talked about this, but there was a real change in the mood when we watched the governor sign this budget on Tuesday. Typically, budget signings are like a huge party.
Like fly around tours all over the state.
Fly around tours. There are dozens of lawmakers.
Confetti.
It's too many people to have it in his office, and everybody kind of wants a piece of it. They want to be in the picture. They're so excited. And yesterday he said, well, a lot of people out on the campaign trail. It's just me. It was just him, the budget chief, and the first lady. Even the girls were not there. Like, we are down to just the bare bones of what was left. He also told us he didn't tell a lot of lawmakers that this was coming. They knew cuts were coming. They didn't know what. He said, listen, once you start getting into these conversations, people make the case for what they think is important, and it is important, but it's not more important to him than leaving a large surplus. And these tax these tax cuts came in as a package and was negotiated. We have to say, like in the very final hours, some of this came down. There was not time for people to go through this budget with a calculator and a fine-tooth comb and really figure out, is this all going to add up? And so at the end of the day, it did not add up. And this is what the governor's chosen to do. It's totally his prerogative, but it does give us some insight into what he considers his legacy, what he considers the best way for him to leave the state, and not knowing who's going to be the next governor. I think he wanted to, as you said, kind of in his mind, be the adult in the room, because a lot of people out on the campaign trail right now who are running for governor are making huge promises that could gobble up this surplus very, very quickly, either through new spending or through significant additional tax cuts. And Kemp, I think, is like, he's almost future-proofing the state budget for whoever comes in next. Yeah,
the governor said he's grateful for what Governor Nathan Deal left him behind, but he's clearly in a much better state right now, a much better fiscal state right now than Georgia was when Governor Kemp took office, because there were some really big cuts, big debates back then about teacher pay raises versus tax cuts. And, in the end, thanks to a giant surplus, Georgia's had a lot more financial breathing room and still has a pretty decent financial breathing room. But of course, that could change very quickly. Before we take a break, I do want to play the governor talking in his own view, in his own stance, his philosophy towards these cuts.
I could have signed the budget, not made these cuts, but it would have been a mess for somebody in the big budget next year after I'm gone. And I just wasn't going to leave the state or our next governor in that, or the General Assembly, quite honestly, in that fiscal position.
So let the governor have the final word on that segment, or final-ish word. When we come back, more about the governor's decisions involving power politics and culture wars. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. What's up, Patricia?
Hey, Greg.
If you have a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, and Patricia will do it in that accent, you can call our hotline anytime, leave your question, and we'll play it back and answer it right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. That's 770-810-5297. We can't wait to hear from you. Okay, we spent the first segment talking about the budget bloodbath triggered by Governor Kemp's tax cut package. But some of the most explosive decisions the governor made on deadline day weren't really about money at all. They were about politics. They were about power. And they were about the culture wars that are still always sort of an undercurrent in Georgia's elections. And let's talk about one that I think we tabbed it weeks ago as likely sign, although I thought that there was a chance the governor could end up striking this. And this was the sweeping measure that will fundamentally reshape local politics as long as it stays in law across Metro Atlanta, and sparks a major court fight with Democratic prosecutors, including Fulton County DA Fani Willis. And that is the legislation that makes most local races in 5 core Metro Atlanta counties, Clayton, Cobb, Gwinnett, Fulton, and DeKalb, all nonpartisan. Democrats control, I think, essentially almost all of these offices right now, including all those offices, DAs, 5 black women. And now these races, rather than having a D or R next to your name, will be nonpartisan. The reason why that's important, Patricia, is because Democrats hold all these offices, and there's a chance, not necessarily maybe with the incumbents who are in office now, but down the road, it could be a lot harder. Democrats will have to spend a lot more to remind voters that, hey, that name on the ballot, that's a Democratic candidate, even if it's a nonpartisan race.
Yeah, I'll be fascinated to see what happens with this bill, because just as soon, maybe even before the ink was dry, we heard from DeKalb County District Attorney Sherry Boston and others that they will be filing a lawsuit about this immediately, partially because it only applies to 5 counties. It does not apply to the entire state. And the 5 counties, of course, as you said, are the most populous and the most Democratic and have Black women leading those DA offices. And this has mostly to do with the DAs. These are women who have scrapped with this General Assembly repeatedly. And this fight is 100% not over. I do agree, though, that it puts them, it's just a much harder situation to run in a May primary when your voters are used to seeing you on the November ballot. A lot of times, some of these races, including the judicial races, will happen in May, and then I'll continue to get questions in November, like, oh, what's going on with that with either the DA race or what's going on with the judicial race? I'm like, that was over and done with in earlier this year. So we'll have to see what happens with this. There was some thought, even as recently as the day that Kemp signed it, that he wasn't going to sign it because it was going to come under such legal fire. They're going to have to really defend it and defend the logic behind having it apply only to certain counties. Did they make that argument while this was coming through? I don't remember the proponents of this bill explaining why exactly it had to be just these 5 counties.
Yeah, they just said this would depoliticize local elections that shouldn't be political in general. But the flip side of that coin is if you're going to do that, fine. There's a lot of Democrats that said, go ahead and do that. Just make every office, every local office throughout the state nonpartisan. Do that and, down in South and rural Georgia or deep red corners of Northeast and Northwest Georgia. You could do it across the state if you're going to do it. And that was the rub, right? Also, during the debate, Patricia, there were a handful of lawmakers who made it very clear that Fani Willis was at the center of this too. They said that they maybe not mentioned her name, but they referred to her, talking about there are some prosecutors who want to go after Republican leaders and who are targeting President Trump. So they did not do much to distance themselves from the argument that this is yet another piece of legislation, another effort under the Gold Dome that targets Fani Willis, punishes her for that failed prosecution against President Trump and his allies. Will she face any sort of, no, she'll still probably overwhelmingly win. She's the best known figure in Fulton County, or at least one of the best known figures in Fulton County politics. But it could certainly hobble candidates who come after her in an open race because, again, the parties are now going to have to spend a lot more money to remind voters that so-and-so is aligned with the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and the legislature very frequently passes legislation. They do it every day that has to do with just a single county. It usually comes through the local calendar, and it's usually done with the support and the impetus of the lawmakers who represent those counties. This was done over the severe, significant objections of most of the local lawmakers who represent these areas. And again, because it just applies to 5 counties, it doesn't even feel like a local calendar bill. It just feels like they're just picking out 5 counties. And Democrats, again, were like, sure, you can make that argument. Just do it in your own county, too. And then we can start having that conversation.
This happened to be the five of the bluest counties, the most populous counties in Georgia.
What a coincidence.
The heart of Democratic power in Georgia. There was another big bill the governor signed, and that was what we've called the Epstein Amendment, even though I don't know how much it has to do with it. Epstein was never a state lawmaker. But it will make public any settlement involving unlawful workplace conduct claims against members of the Georgia General Assembly over the last few years, including allegations of sexual harassment, discrimination, discriminatory harassment, or retaliation. Patricia, you've written extensively about this, and this is a big deal for many reasons, but one of them is because these settlements have historically been locked under, in a safe somewhere. I mean, I broke the story about one of them years ago in 2018, but it took an extraordinary amount of sleuthing to kind of get that report. But lawmakers, especially those who are targeted by these, have little incentive to release them themselves. And now there is this legal mechanism to do so.
Yeah, it's interesting that the lieutenant governor's race had this moment where Senator Tillery brought out basically a pledge to have every member on the panel, everybody who's running for lieutenant governor as a Republican, go ahead and waive their rights to privacy or We have the rights to accountability, as you may want to call it, and go ahead and say, yes, you can go ahead and release my records. A number of news organizations reached out to have all of those records released and have candidly not gotten a response from leaders. So
now they will.
Yeah, well, now they will. This does have the force of law. There are also significant teeth in this bill. It's not a suggestion to state lawmakers to release these records once an open records request comes in. There are actual fines. There's a role for the Superior Court to get involved if the House and Senate are not responsive to ORAs. And so I do expect that if there are agreements that have been struck with state money, we'll know about it. And we're being told, no, there's nobody knows anything. There's no records. There's no agreements. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, we'll find out. I would be shocked if it was just Republicans, though. I think we can think of multiple Democrats who may have a situation that could come to light. This does not apply to private agreements, to civil settlements. Those are typically protected by non-disclosure agreements and happen completely outside of not people's knowledge, but it's very difficult to get information about that. And that is why the Epstein situation is somewhat analogous to a civil lawsuit, because if a victim has signed an NDA, also, there's a huge power dynamic. They're afraid to come forward and don't come forward.
Yeah.
And so that's why getting to the heart of all of these allegations, it's very difficult. But this does provide, I think, some very real transparency. Yeah. As soon as it passed, I called a bunch of lawmakers to say, is this real or is this just window dressing? They're like, no, it's real. And so if there's anything there, we'll know about it.
Yeah, and it still shields the names of the victims too, but it does not
and
shield
the witnesses, yes,
and the witnesses, but not of the lawmakers. And you're right, Patricia. This is a big moment, and it was tacked on to several pieces of legislation that were moving through the Gold Dome. So the people who wanted to pass it, including Randy Robertson, who you've talked to extensively, including State Senator Blake Tillery, who's a candidate for lieutenant governor, really wanted it passed. So one of the pieces of legislation that was tacked onto actually got vetoed. It was a separate sort of reform measure, procedural measure. Not that it's not important. It was just a completely separate issue. This one did skate through. But it's also become an issue in the lieutenant governor's race. I know we had former State Senator John F. Kennedy here just the other day on the show. We asked him about it. He said, look, I have no problem, with this going through. He's one of the 5 Republicans on a debate stage at Atlanta Press Club debate just a few weeks ago who signed Hillary's pledge, basically saying, even if the governor doesn't sign this, will you still agree to have these records, revealed? And all of them said, sure. All of them said, so, you can see how lawmakers, especially those who are targeted with swirls of rumors about their conduct, right? There's lots of rumors under the Gold Dome, but you can see how some lawmakers will say, you know what, I want this because it could just clarify that record. It could just make these shadowy, rumors, put them to rest.
Yes. And there is also a time frame associated with this, 3 business days once an ORA is received. So if you get out your calendars, that has us just before Election Day.
Just in time for Tuesday.
Just funny how that happens. I'm dying to know what the results are, and we will soon know.
Yeah. Let's talk about one more major piece of legislation. It was not signed at Tuesday's deadline, but it was signed just before the deadline. And this is one that has broad bipartisan support, and I'm coming around to it too. At first I was against it, but now I'm becoming more supportive of it. And I only say that because it's involving cell phones for teenagers in high school. And it's that measure that Representative Scott Hilton backed, that really overhauls the way we think about school, because it restricts high school students from bringing their cell phones to school. There's still some carve-outs for emergencies and access to phones for in some cases, and it gives the schools a lot of leeway to help craft their policies. But at first I was like, I don't know. But now the more I kind of see how my daughter
Yeah.
is glued to the damn phone. I talk to more and more teachers about it and the implications it can have, the more supportive I am of it.
I wouldn't mind a bell to bell and then some no cell, because you do just see just these cascading effects of kids being just glued to their phones, including really significant academic struggles and mental health challenges and even violence in schools. We heard from a number of principals who said, listen, there will be a group text to say, meet us under the stairs, and we're going to video everything that happens. So it has presented immense challenges of different varieties for administrators. And so this takes the onus off of administrators and says, actually, it's a law. In fact, it is against the law for you to have your phone at school. They can take them to school. They just turn them in at the beginning of the academic day. They get it back at the end of the academic day. There are carve-outs for students who are in academic work programs. If they need them for a disability, but in most cases, they will be relinquishing their cell phone and their ability to communicate with peers during English class. And I think it's a really good idea. There's a lot of data to support this, and I've been for it since the beginning, Greg.
You've always been on board. I think we were the ones who told Scott Hilton that he's sponsoring this measure. So.
We did give him the good news.
Well, that's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you enjoy what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Hunker down for a very big week in Georgia politics. Come and get your rest in, folks. And share Politically Georgia with a friend. We'll talk to you next time on Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.